Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome in to the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 7. At least so I am told. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only, Payne Insider. And Payne, I'm not sure what kind of abomination we saw unfold on Monday Night Football, but I guess that's what we should come to expect when you have two elite head coaches in Mike McCarthy and Brandon Staley matching wits in primetime.
You're asking me more stuff. This was supposed to be a quick, abbreviated show, concise, because we have a little bit of a meeting here shortly, and now you're throwing more
Well,
stuff
we're just going to
out.
offer up a best bet, and we're going to get out of Dodge. It's going to be the shortest NFL Thursday podcast we've ever done, in and out in 7 minutes.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, but one of these days. Monday Night Football. I think you called it nicely in that Corey Linsley, his absence would be a little bit of an issue here, and sure enough it was. Justin Herbert was pressured on 47% of his dropbacks, caused a lot of balls to be inaccurate. They're still struggling to find that downfield weapon, and as great as Keenan Allen is, and it's a game we'll talk about a little bit here, but you're just searching for weapons. When you think about the Chargers, and it's nice getting Austin Eckler back, and certainly he can be that valve out of the backfield for you, and Keenan is as good as there are, in the short to intermediate areas, but like where's the burst, where's the pop? And you're just not finding that from this offense, and Justin Herbert was wildly inaccurate again on Monday night, but it wasn't some fantastic performance from the Cowboys either. They did everything they could to throw that game away, and you start to question Mike McCarthy again. I know they got out of there with a win, and for us, it's like, just get to 10, Mike. Get to 10.
That was a big one. That was a big one to get there, to get to 4.
I just don't see the offensive minds on that coaching staff allowing this roster and offense to get to a point where it's truly competing for something meaningful, and just little things throughout the course of the game. What's the shot to the back of the end zone for Tony Pollard? Think about that in context of not having a clue of what you're doing as a head coach. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was 3rd and long in that situation. They're inside the green zone, right? But a first down,
You're able
there
to burn the rest of the
effectively
clock.
ends. So not only are you attempting the more difficult throw, if he catches the touchdown, the Chargers get the ball back and have a chance to tie the game. If you go with the less difficult throw, pick up 9-10 yards, the game's over. So, I mean, just an absolute clueless coach, and it just drives me nuts that he's making millions of dollars for a multi-billion-dollar organization. And, I don't know how long that can last, just because even in wins, you're spotting inefficiency with just the very basic things of being a head coach.
Hey, look, I mean, it's what the Cowboys have done for years, and then more importantly, the most valuable player you have on your defense has to pipe off about non-related football situations. Just be quiet. Just go out there and try and win games. But it is the Dallas Cowboys. The sense of entitlement continues to resonate there. And despite their own ineptitude, the team has moved to 4-2, but doesn't appear, at least to my eyes, to be a legitimate threat in the NFC by any capacity. You mentioned offense and some poor play calling there from the Dallas Cowboys. Some interesting stuff circulating on the interweb about lack of offense overall in the National Football League this year. And not saying that we need to do a deep dive by any stretch of the imagination, but wanted to get your quick take on some of the things that you've observed along with the guys that you work with on the topic.
So we apparently got a 1-star review recently because I said I didn't want to divulge too much on this. And the gentleman said, well, what am I tuning in for? if you're not going to divulge everything. So I will divulge a little bit more to satisfy some of those folks now that that's publicly out there. One thing we've seen this year is clearly a ton of just variance in the league. You go back to our Monday show, and there was 5, 6, 7 wrong side winners that came home for some people. It's been that, right? And certainly some weather throughout the course of the season, and you got a couple weather games again this weekend, depending on how impactful the nor'easter is. But there's a culmination of things that's going on in this league, and you can kind of see it if you are into recruiting at the college level. You can see it if you are fully immersed in college, right? What's the big issue going on in some of this? There's not enough offensive linemen. There's just not. And so we're starting to track some of that data, and as it translates to the NFL, it just seems like there is a massive discrepancy in the talent along defensive lines versus offensive lines, and it's creating more penalties on the offense, less penalties in terms of encroachment and things of that nature. So right there, an uptick in offensive line penalties, a downtick in defensive penalties. The way the league is now calling some of the penalties downfield, whereas before you'd get a ton of pass interference calls, now they're calling, holding penalties, which are just 5-yard varieties and not 38 and 50-yard penalties, which are massive. We know the league has downtrended in terms of explosiveness on offense. Offenses are having to go a little bit more methodical down to down because of, it's a copycat league. So once people kind of saw how teams were defending Patrick Mahomes for that short sector and some of the issues the Chiefs offense was having, it became a copycat league. The red zone stuff, all of the innovative wide receiver rubs and, rollouts and quarterback run game starting to get solved a little bit. So, and there's a multitude of reasons for the scoring being down. I kind of hinted a couple weeks ago that these totals, where they were set, down 4.5 points, and it continues to dwindle a little bit more. But there's a ton of reasons why this is happening, and ultimately this becomes the $1 million question: how can you capitalize on this, right? I don't know if we've reached the bottom yet. I don't know if we've reached the floor to where you start pumping in a ton of overs, because I'm not sure there's going to be like a systematic change this season. But it certainly made things a little bit more difficult as a bettor. That's for sure.
Yeah, and when you look at some of the counting numbers, the league averaging 5.2 yards per play this season, the fewest through week 6 since 2006. The fewest touchdowns scored at this point in the season, 428, since we saw 418 scored back in 2010. And when you look at the scoring just last week, where unders had their time to shine, games averaged 36.7 points per game, the fewest in any week since 2014, week 15, that came in at 36.4. So just food to think about.
And you see some of those other discrepancies too, right? Like when we talk about offensive line play and defensive line play, like pressure rates are down, but sack rates are up. And there's just some wonky stuff going on there. I mean, there's a number of things, and it's tough to like pinpoint a specific one, but it's leading to some madness, right? I mean, again, I think on Monday we talked about some of the totals. 6 red zone trips for the Ravens last week. Total doesn't go over. And it's a total set at 40 and a half, and sure, it crept up. I mean, how many points did you have in the first half of the Commanders game last week? Game still can't go over. We outlined the Jets total last week. I mean, the Eagles had 4 drives in the first half. 2 were touchdowns, 2 were into plus territory. The Jets had 5 drives in the first half. 3 were into the red zone. 1 was to the green zone. And there was 23 points at halftime. Probably could have been, 30 plus. All of a sudden in the second half, you get that one drive to midfield that takes forever, the punt and pin, and now the over is basically dead and buried at that point. So, it's a multitude of things that's happening. It's making it very difficult because you're assessing these offenses, and you're like, hey, some of the down-to-down success stuff is showing efficiency. and then all of a sudden just the scoring isn't there. So it makes it very difficult and creates, much larger variance.
It's a complex formula sometimes, and you wonder if there's a breakthrough. To your point, that I think is definitely prescient around these parts, is when do you hit the ground floor for a total too low, where you don't have to be ultra efficient to be able to sneak over a number, should it be set in the high 30s. You have a 37 on the board, I believe, is the lowest total. Last week we got as low as 35.5 at one point for the 49ers and Browns. And anybody who watched that game goes, look, I didn't think either offense did a whole hell of a lot. It still goes over the total because all it takes is a play here and a play there, and you have no breathing room if you're an underbetter. So a lot of interesting things to think about when you continue to go through the gymnastics of identifying opportunities to be found in the betting market, especially as you're looking to handicap totals. Into the Thursday night game, where we have an interesting one with the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road against the New Orleans Saints. The Jags playing their third game in 12 days or thereabouts by my ability to do math. It's the Jags now, a 2-point road underdog. Obviously, the big storyline here, Trevor Lawrence, will he or won't he go? Dealing with a mild knee sprain. Total on this game sits at 40. And this is a Jags team that's now multiple games above 500 for the first time since Week 5 back in 2018, snapping the longest active drought of 82 games in the NFL. They're 9-2 in their last 11 regular season games. When you look at Trevor Lawrence, the only 2 blemishes he ever suffered on his college football resume both came in New Orleans, the 2019 College Football National Championship to LSU and the 2020 National Semifinal against Ohio State. Meanwhile, this is a Saints team that's been synonymous with games going under the total. They're the only team to go under in every game this season, and that streak has now been run to 12 straight games. When you look at some of the injuries, the Saints a little bit banged up along the offensive line. Going to want to keep tabs into Mario Davis on the defensive side there. Meanwhile, for the Jags, Tyson Campbell, Zay Jones out, Walker a little along the offensive line out, Devon Hamilton, despite being a full participant. The Jags say he's going to be out for this game as well. But rather than speculate on Trevor Lawrence's ability to go today, Payne, against the Saints defense, let's flip the script and look at Derek Carr and this New Orleans offense and how they go about attacking a Jags defense that's been very good against the run, but has left a lot to be desired in terms of their ability to cover downfield, other than when Josh Allen becomes a human wrecking ball up front, since Trayvon Walker last seen on a milk carton somewhere in a Jacksonville convenience store.
Yeah, the Jaguars' defense has been surprisingly stout relative to all the opinions and thoughts and well-educated thoughts, heading into the season. And what's pretty impressive about this is Jacksonville's played, top 5 schedule of offenses, and they're top 10 in defensive efficiency. Very stout against the run, top 3 in both EPA per rush and rushing success rate. You start to wonder, though, with what you mentioned. What was it, 3 games in 12 days is what you said?
Yeah, I mean, they played on Sunday in London. They play the Sunday at home against the Colts, and now they run it back here on a short week.
So you do wonder when the performance below expectation pops up. You spent 2 weeks in London. You come back home to face the Colts in a game with first place in the division on the line, and now you travel on a short week for a Thursday night game. So it's not an ideal spot here for the Jaguars, that's for sure. Now, the Saints' offense has been pretty disappointing, and that's partly why they've reeled off 12 straight unders. Below average in efficiency despite facing a bottom 10 schedule of defenses. The red zone woes have been highly publicized and something we just talked about, but Derek Carr was horrific in that area last year with the Raiders as well. Red zone efficiency was dead last in the NFL. Passer rating worst of any QB in that area since 2020. This year appears the same, but there's been a lot of drops down there, which is interesting. I'd like to see what that looks like a little bit more normalized. Pete Carmichael is having problems getting the plays in on time. You saw the outburst from Carr last week, but it just doesn't feel like Carr and Carmichael are on the same page. So I'm not sure if the Saints are the type of offense to fully take advantage of a bad spot for Jacksonville's defense, especially with 2 starting offensive linemen down of their own, and then one of those positions, the backup, is also missing. So there's a possibility, unless there's some full-blown movements of parts, that you're looking at a third-string offensive lineman going for the Saints tonight. Tyson Campbell is one to discuss a little bit. He's out in the Jaguars secondary, and so that means 7th-rounder Buster Brown steps into a little bit more of a prominent role for Jacksonville's defense. The sample size is extremely small, but he's played 55 snaps over 2 seasons, and once Tyson Campbell went down last week, Buster got torched. 6 catches allowed on 8 targets and a touchdown, good for a 151 passer rating. You mentioned that downfield passing attack, mostly to Shaheed and Olave, and that maybe presents a couple of issues there. If the Saints can hit some explosives, that'd be nice. Maybe it opens up things a little bit on the ground, although I don't see that being the case. Jacksonville, though, does have issues getting to the quarterback. 24th in pass rush win rate. They have to blitz to get pressure, and it's left them susceptible to running back passes. Kamara, we thought, would have a little bit more juice based upon how he looked in the preseason, and then he got the 3-game suspension, which he thought the legs would kind of look similar to what they did in the preseason. That hasn't really been the case. It doesn't look like prime Kamara, but he does have 23 receptions over 3 games, so I think he's going to be a factor tonight. I'm not sure what you have, but my feeling here is, and this is kind of sloshed back and forth, when the reports that, and they were wrong reports, that Beathard was basically starting, we saw the Saints get to 3. And then once people sifted through the amalgamated news and understood that necessarily wasn't 100% confirmed, we saw this dip back down to pick. And now we're kind of trickling back out to 1.5, 2. So I think this is interesting. My gut says if Trevor Lawrence gets announced in, he's not going to be 100%. The spot is still very bad. This probably goes back to like pick Jaguars -1.
Yeah.
He's apparently going to test it pregame. If he is ultimately deemed out, I think you're going to see the market cross the 3 here, and it's going to be Saints 3.5, maybe even saw 4 as a close.
It'll be interesting. I mean, because you look at the volume of games the Jags have played, they're not saying it's anything serious to the knee, but anytime you're telling me a player doesn't know if he's going to go the morning he wakes up and they're going to test it before the game, I know this isn't quite the bait and switch that we see in college football, although I'm sure Doug Peterson's approach to the quarterback position would make Kyle Whittingham in Salt Lake City jealous that he's able to keep all of this under wraps. We'll see exactly what we get, but I think the Saints, by virtue of their loss last week in a game where they were probably much better in the second half, the defense started to get going. You can hear the players' comments through some of the interviews that they've done this week about starting faster, showing that level of urgency. And you mentioned it. The Saints haven't exactly taken on a murderer's row by any stretch of the imagination so far this season. This, on paper, may be one of the most difficult games they'll play all year, knowing how soft their schedule was. The interesting part about this, though, it's one of the cheapest get-in prices for a Saints home game in a long time on some of the third-party websites, because you always like to gauge some of the sentiment around how electric these atmospheres will be. Payne, you could go down there, grab yourself a nice little Hurricane on Bourbon Street and get into the game for $22 tonight, something that you wouldn't have seen when the Saints were at their absolute peak.
No, that's a far cry from breezing those record-setting offenses that the Saints were putting out there, and that Super Bowl run year was just electric down there.
No doubt about it. So interesting game on Thursday night for a variety of reasons. You're going to want to continue to monitor the injury report to gauge the status of Trevor Lawrence. On to Sunday, Payne, and no doubt the best game on the schedule until we get to Sunday night potentially. We'll see the Detroit Lions on the road for the second straight week, this time traveling to Maryland to take on the Baltimore Ravens. And the Ravens, a soft 3-point favorite in this contest. The total down from where it opened, but up from where it was bet to early in the week. And the Lions are seeking their first 6-1 or better start through 7 games since 1956. They have the best record in the NFL, tied or shared this late in a season for the first time since 1993, which is also the last time that they won their division. They've now won 4 straight games by 14-plus points for the first time since 1934, and they've done nothing but cash tickets at the window, going 14-2 ATS in their last 16 games overall. Meanwhile, the Ravens have gone under in 9 straight home games, and they've gone under in 16 out of their last 20 contests. When we look at the injury report for Baltimore, the most notable, Marcus Williams, dealing with a hamstring injury. Odafe Owe back at practice. We'll see if he can return to action. Meanwhile, for the Lions, there wasn't any suspense in their backfield. David Montgomery already ruled out on a Thursday morning. Craig Reynolds, one of the backup options, dealing with a little lower body ailment himself. And we'll wait and see if Jahmyr Gibbs can take on an increased workload. When you look at a game like this, the Lions have obviously gone out there and answered the bell week in, week out. Baltimore, misleading final. Yes, they cover against the Titans, but they could have won that game by 3 touchdowns. Which side of the ball are you most fascinating to watch unfold on Sunday? Is it Jared Goff and the offense against a Ravens defense that has been outstanding, or on the other side, a Lions defense that has really raised its level of play against the Baltimore offense that's shown flashes of brilliance but has lacked prolonged consistency?
Yeah, this one is very interesting because both sides offer some intriguing matchups. I think with the Lions offense in this specific spot, there's a pretty large range of outcomes. Baltimore hasn't faced a competent offense to start the season. And the two you would consider that were dealing with injury to the quarterbacks. Aside from it, being C.J. Stroud in his debut with weather, you had, Tannehill and Pickett and Minshew. In terms of efficiency, C.J. Stroud's the best quarterback the Ravens have faced so far. Now, it looks like there's some weather in Baltimore. Winds are approaching 20 miles per hour, gusts into the 30s, temps in the upper 50s. This type of weather is mostly responsible for Jared Goff's home road splits having such a large delta. And I know people last week will be like, well, he was on the road last week against Tampa. It was as nice of conditions as you could possibly have for a road outdoor game. And we mentioned Monday that they don't win that game without Goff because they could not get the ground game fired up. You'd anticipate this being a Jared Goff game, seeing how the Ravens have defended the run and then the parts that you mentioned that are either missing or dinged up for the Lions in the backfield. If the wins end up being as large of a factor as it potentially looks now first thing Thursday morning, and Detroit can't get that ground game fired up, it becomes a little bit more of a tougher challenge. Obviously, it's nice having St. Brown there operating underneath. Gibbs potentially returning, would help that short throw game as well. I actually think the other side, though, is where the largest advantage in this game potentially is. To me, the Ravens' offense is bubbling right now. It's just kind of waiting to burst out. You mentioned last week the domination that they showed offensively. The problem was just 1 for 6 in the red zone. They still managed to score 24. Now, the potential for win certainly limits the ceiling, but I think you have, again, an offense that's kind of just ready to go, and I'm not completely sold on the Lions' defense. I think it's much improved, and you've seen them add talent, especially in the front seven the last 2 drafts. But it's been a bottom 10 schedule of offenses faced for the Lions. You look at this 4-game win streak. It's against Desmond Ridder on the road. It's Bryce Young at home before they decided to change a ton of things offensively. It's Baker and Love on the road. There's nothing threatening about those 4 offenses right now.
But Payne, they beat the Chiefs
Ravens
on the road week 1. They have to hang their hat on that.
I mean, even the Chiefs' offense relative to what they've been, right? Not exactly humming. And, when you face Seattle too, heading into that game, the thought process was, is this an elite Seattle offense? Because we've known Geno's struggles to end last season. We saw him struggle week 1, and we're like, what Seattle offense are we getting here? So even the time you've played the best offenses on your schedule hasn't been the most conducive to those offenses' success. But I think what's interesting here is you go back and look at some of these teams too. They're not multiple, right? The Falcons can't really throw it, although they've chosen to do that the last 2 weeks because that's been the better of paths. Bryce Young, in that Carolina offense, not overly multiple. Baker's offense can't really run the football. Love's offense without Aaron Jones can't really run the football. So that's going to be different here. The Ravens are able to be multiple. I think if there is weather, they're at least more moldable to the conditions. If the wind ends up being a bust, right, then you can fire up the pass game against a Lions secondary that I think is extremely vulnerable. And I think you got to keep an eye on Brian Branch and his status. Didn't practice at all last week with the high ankle sprain. Tried to get in a limited on Wednesday. Let's see what that looks like today. But that would be a much larger concern for the Lions secondary if he can't go. You go back and actually watch last week. Baker had dudes streaking wide open, just couldn't hit them. The Lions also have faced 1 rushing offense this season that's above average in efficiency. It was the Seahawks, number 13. Seattle had the 4th best EPA per rush output in week 2, and they faced the Lions defense. So I think it's possible the style of offense the Ravens play could kind of put Aaron Glenn in a tough spot here if he elects to go zone and keep his eyes on Lamar because, you don't want his legs hurting you. Lamar's been wildly more efficient passer this season against zone. You play man, and you quickly see why Aaron Glenn has said multiple times over the years his defense isn't fully designed to stop mobile quarterbacks. Mark Andrews hasn't had the best start, but this is a spot where you could see him perform a little bit better because the Lions linebackers and safeties have been extremely vulnerable to the pass, the middle of the field passes. So there's some matchups on paper that appear really, really solid for Baltimore here, Todd, and you kind of combine that with the idea of, are we reaching peak price here on the Lions? Now, I understand when you kind of zoom out and look at their path in the NFC and their path to the Super Bowl, it's as easy as it gets for anybody. But in terms of like their actual power profile, their power rating, can you get any higher right now on the Lions? I don't know if you can.
I'm not sure you can. And when you look at their upcoming schedule, it's not as though this group is going to be tested a ton. After going to Baltimore on Sunday, 3 of their next 4 games will come at home, including a primetime tilt against the Raiders. They get a bye. They go to the Chargers and then get the Bears and Green Bay in their own building, the Green Bay game on Thanksgiving, which may be a coronation for the Lions to win their first division title before the calendar gets to December, regardless of what happens on Sunday. But fascinating matchup, and I think you talking about Jared Goff having optimal conditions to play outside definitely resonates. We'll see if Mother Nature is as forgiving this weekend in Baltimore against the Ravens defense that's starting to take on an identity and looking to be a little bit more buttoned up than what we saw for stretches a season ago. From the East Coast to the West Coast in an afternoon time slot, I'll see that the Rams host the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's the Rams a field goal favorite. Total in this game, 43.5. When you begin to dig into the Steelers, they've been a lot of things this year. Explosive on offense ain't one of them, but they are a team that has thrived coming off of the bye. 12-4 record since 2007, which was the first season of Mike Tomlin's career, tied for the best record in the NFL during that span. And you look at what they've been able to do, 6-0 straight up in the last games after a bye. It's the 3rd longest active streak. They've been good ATS as well. But this is still a Steelers team, Payne, that's minus 31 with their point differential this season. They're the only team with a winning record and a negative point differential. The injury report, however, for Pittsburgh looks a lot more optimistic than it did going into the bye. Deontay Johnson listed as a full participant in practice, returning from his hamstring injury on IR. You're potentially getting Pat Freiermuth back in the fold as well, so it gives them 2 weapons. They've said that their offensive line, not sure it's necessarily a good thing, should be healthy overall as well. Meanwhile, for the Rams, dealing with a rash of injuries, most notably cluster injuries to the backfield, where Kyron Williams out. He'll be a DMP this week. Ronnie Rivers put on IR. They go to the scrap heap and dust off some familiar names, including Darrell Henderson, Royce Freeman. Zach Evans at least appears to be RB1. Some concerns there, though. But you dig into this Rams passing attack, and Matthew Stafford's 227 pass attempts rank the Rams 5th in the league so far, but he's completing just a shade more than 61% of his passes. It would be his lowest mark in a season since 2014. All the buzz was about Puka Nacua and what he did in his first handful of games. Not here to disparage any of those marks. You had Cooper Kupp back into the fold. 1 times 1 still equals 1 when the players play similar positions. When you look at the Rams' passing game against this Steelers defense, do they have a path to success if their ground game can't get on track against the Steelers' run defense that has been extremely vulnerable?
Passing and pressure. I think that's the ultimate key to this game and who wins it. I mean, you have a Rams pass offense right now and a Steelers pass defense that both have massive deltas in performance based on pressure. There is not a matchup this weekend that features a quarterback and a defense going against each other that has a dichotomy this large centering on pressure. And I think that's why potentially you're seeing some difference of opinion. If you look at Matthew Stafford, he's turned back the clock in certain games, but when he's pressured, I mean, it has not been pretty. If you look at 35 quarterbacks, Stafford is 33rd in adjusted accuracy with heat, 25th in turnover-worthy plays. When the Steelers get pressure, and you would think it's a defense that should be fresher off the bye. You can conjure up some stunts and some pressures that you haven't maybe put on film yet this season. Then you think about the majority of the crowd being in your favor, despite it being a road game.
Oh, it'll be a home game for sure. That is home field advantage. You build that in your number for this game with the Steelers.
And so, it might be a little bit louder for Stafford. Maybe they have to go to a silent count. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see there. But the Steelers' pass defense has been outstanding when they can get pressure. Top 5 in EPA per pass allowed. Quarterbacks are completing less than 38% of their attempts. Created more than a handful of turnovers when they get pressure. But if the Steelers don't get pressure, Pittsburgh has been a bottom 7 defense in the NFL in EPA per pass allowed. They're allowing a 107 passer rating and nearly 8.5 yards per attempt when they can't get to opposing quarterbacks. And Matthew Stafford has absolutely been fantastic. He hunts the big play when he has time. Number 1 in big-time throw rate from a clean pocket, 81% adjusted accuracy. And these numbers are without the aforementioned man, Cooper Kupp, only playing in 2 of the 6 data points. So you think about how large that is. If the Steelers are not getting pressure, they go from a top 5 defense basically to a bottom 5 defense. When Stafford is throwing from a clean pocket, he is elite. When he's been pressured this season, he has been a bottom 5 quarterback. Market-wise, we've seen early a buy on the Steelers taking out the hooks. That is not surprising at all, and it's somewhat understandable, right? Pittsburgh off the bye, 0 home field advantage for the Rams, probably a little bit of a home field advantage for the Steelers. You talked about that injury report at the top. Deontay Johnson gets in a full on Wednesday. Pat Freiermuth gets in a full on Wednesday. While they have not performed extremely well, Dan Moore and James Daniels got in full practices, so you got 2 of your starting offensive linemen back. Now that it's at 3, I've spoke to a handful of bettors, a couple of the groups that we associate with. There's been basically a dead split opinion at the current number, which isn't surprising since pressure comes with a lot of variance, right? If you could peg down, are the Steelers going to be able to get pressure? Is Matthew Stafford and that offensive line going to be able to handle the pressure a little bit better? When they don't get pressure, they're going to be able to take full advantage like they have at the rate they have, right? It creates a lot of variance here. So the next move will be interesting. My vibe is if you get the on-screen uptick of Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth, maybe it sends this to like a soft 3 on the Rams. I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go from here. This is one of those interesting games. But my vibe is if Deontay and Pat get upgraded on the screen, we see the Rams go to like a soft.
And that was some of the talk this week about potentially getting those 2 players back, knowing that if teams have to scheme defensively for Deontay Johnson, it'll open up some more downfield opportunities for George Pickens. We know Deontay wasn't able to find the end zone last year, but he was more or less the security blanket underneath for Kenny Pickett to get the ball out of his hands quickly. You mentioned the pressure that the Steelers can generate coming off the edge. What I'm going to be interested to watch is how they go about their defensive back rotation. We finally saw Joey Porter Jr. get a lot more snaps in the second half against the Ravens, and you listen to some of the veteran comments from Patrick Peterson leading up to this game. They may allow Porter to be their true first number 1 cornerback. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing if they rotate Levi Wallace and Patrick Peterson on the other side, but it may give them a little bit of an opportunity to be versatile, especially against a Rams team that has multiple weapons that can beat you over the top, not just Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, but also what we've seen from Tutu Atwell and his ability to stretch the field. A fun matchup, no doubt, Sunday afternoon.
I think what's interesting, with Deontay and Pat Freiermuth potentially back, and you think about that matchup, the Rams have done a really good job negating the deep pass, the explosive pass that really make you operate underneath. And as much as we love George Pickens, he really hasn't been the guy that's going to just tear you alive in the short intermediate range. Deontay Johnson's clearly the best route runner on this team, so having him back in those areas would be a nice little bump, right? Just in general, having him back is nice, but specific to this matchup, probably worth a little bit more in value.
And there's no doubt, to your point, Pickens, we see all those highlight reel catches, his ability to go up there and make the contested grab, but I don't think anybody will call him an elite route runner by any stretch of the imagination, working underneath with a willingness all the time to pick up some of those tough yards. So we'll see if the Steelers can get some of those weapons back and be able to operate at multiple levels in attacking this Rams defense. But Payne, when we look at the Sunday schedule, I mean, these are the two teams that we've grown accustomed to in absolute wars in the past. And it's the Chargers on a short week going into Arrowhead Stadium to take on the Kansas City Chiefs, who should be well rested after dispatching the Denver Broncos 19-8 last time we saw them on Thursday Night Football. And it's KC, a 5.5-point favorite in this game. Total, depending on where you look, plenty of 48, some 47.5s out there as well. The Chargers' 2017 loss against Dallas on Monday was their NFL high 12th loss by 3 or fewer points since 2020. You look at the Chiefs, they've won 15 of the last 18 against the Chargers. One of those losses was actually in Week 17 of 2020 when Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce were both rested. All 3 losses by the Chiefs against the Chargers since 2014 have actually come at Arrowhead Stadium. The only Chiefs win by 6 points, though, in the last 6 meetings was a game that needed more than 60 minutes to decide it, a 34-28 win in December of 2021, where Kansas City won that game in overtime. You look at what Mahomes and Reed have done against the AFC West, and it has been an absolute freight train, to say the least. Chargers at Chiefs is the 6th matchup now between Herbert and Mahomes. Mahomes owns the 4-1 series edge, but these two talented quarterbacks have combined for 25 passing touchdowns in the first 5 matchups. The Chargers, again, you bet against them when they're at home. You bet on them when they hit the road. 8-3 ATS on the highway since the start of last season. Meanwhile, the Chiefs have quietly become an under juggernaut, going under the total in 7 of their last 9 games that played at Arrowhead. So many different ways to, I know why you're laughing about that, stupid Bears. When you look at the way this game can go, there are so many different directions. Which side of the ball for you is more fascinating? Is it the Chargers offense led by Justin Herbert, who's shown an inability to do anything productive in the fourth quarter of meaningful football games? Or is it Patrick Mahomes and a Chiefs offense looking for an identity, so much so that they had to go out and trade for a former Chief and Mecole Hardman to bring him back in the fold against a Chargers defense that lacks the ability to stop anybody through the air?
Yeah, I think you like getting Mecole back just with his familiarity of the offense and his ability to be a downfield guy, but you've also seen some massive struggles in short yardage, and so maybe he assists in that with the end-around stuff. The more interesting matchup to me is Justin Herbert against the Chiefs defense. If you are familiar with this series, I mean, Herbert's had a lot of success against the Chiefs defense. This just feels like a different Chiefs defense right now. That's only adding more pieces, and it's young parts.
Damn good.
Yeah. Their young parts in the secondary are continuing to build a little bit more cohesion. I do wonder if, you elect to fire up the ground game here. Get Austin Eckler going, be a little bit more physical. We saw Kellen Moore's refusal to stop trying to run at Dallas on Thursday night. You certainly have a little bit softer of a Chiefs run defense. That's still the one area that, it's a little bit below average. But I think what's interesting is Charles Omenihu returns this week for the Chiefs. Won't be a full workload, but nice to have, a versatile piece up front. You can play on the edge or kick inside next to Chris Jones on passing downs. And I think that's the fun part of this matchup is Justin Herbert, how he's trending, how the pass offense is trending against the Kansas City defense that right now is 6th in pass efficiency, top 3 in both EPA per dropback allowed and passing success rate. And if you look at Justin Herbert, and we hinted at this at the top, he struggled with accuracy in the last 2 games against the Raiders and Cowboys. The first one a little bit more concerning against the Raiders when you think about how they play coverage, but you're looking at 2 of Herbert's worst 4 accuracy performances of his 4-year career of coming back-to-back games. Not what you're wanting in terms of a form heading into basically a game that is, I don't want to say make or break, but this is massive in terms of the outlook of your season moving forward. I look at the Chargers' offensive line issues. Those are part of the reason Herbert's struggling with accuracy the last 2 games. I mean, you hit it perfectly in that question you proposed as a follow-up on Monday night is, how are they going to survive without Corey Linsley, who's on IR? We knew this offensive line had issues on the right side coming into the season with Trey Pipkins and Jamari Saylor. Both are playing below replacement level, but the big change has been without Corey Linsley at center. because now all of a sudden you got question marks from center on out to the right. And Herbert's been pressured on more than 47% of dropbacks the last 2 games. And because of that pressure, right, it's starting to come some of the accuracy issues. The Chargers are also struggling to find some explosiveness in the pass game. You think about some of their parts. I love Keenan Allen, fantastic. But if that's your deep guy, there's some trouble. And now I know he had the fantastic stop and go Monday outside, and Herbert missed him deep. But you're typically not worried about Keenan Allen beating you on the 50, 60, 70 yarders. You're worried about his elite route running in the short to intermediate parts of the field. The Chargers offense clearly misses Mike Williams in the slot. Johnston hasn't been reliable enough to put on the field that much. Palmer was dealing with a little bit of an injury that he played through, had some nice catches on Monday night. Now it's the quick turnaround. The Chiefs have only allowed one quarterback this season to perform over expectation. You know who that was?
Jared Goff, week 1.
Zach freaking Wilson.
Zach was at his absolute best. That was vintage Zach Wilson on that Sunday night football game against Utah Tech back in his prime days at BYU.
So this is a little bit of a weird game for me, and I think bettors in the market are telling us that right now. It's 6.5 with an affordable buy opportunity 7. I'm in. Maybe you could convince me at 6 with the Chiefs not fully finding their footing offensively and how the Chargers continually play close games and some of the market discrepancies you alluded to when they go out on the road versus being at home, but we're kind of here in the dead zone at 5. It's just not enough for me to tangle with the matchups not being as favorable as they've been for the Chargers against the Chiefs in previous seasons. And I know the Chargers had the bye in week 5, but the Chiefs also have 4 extra days of rest and prep for this one.
It's always interesting because you hate to default to the 2-minute handicap. These teams always play close games. It's like the AFC West version of the Ravens and Steelers. But there are a lot of things to be concerned about for the Chargers. Are they able to get right on a short week and figure all of this out for a season that quickly could slip away again as they sit on the cusp of 2-3 going into Arrowhead, winning when the Chiefs have extra time to prepare? Not one of the easiest things to accomplish as an NFL franchise. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most important, easy for me to say. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod and sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. Absolutely free right to your inbox. If you're listening to this podcast on Thursday, you'll have all of that great information right at your fingertips, including prop bets that have been white hot to start the campaign. All there for you, absolutely free. So encourage you to take advantage of that. All right, Payne, into the Sunday night game that might arguably be the true crown jewel on the Week 7 schedule, and that'll see your Dolphins traveling to the city of brotherly love to take on the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's the Eagles less than a field goal favorite, 2.5 minus 20. Total on the game down from where it opened as high as 53.5 into that 51.5, 52 range. And this will mark the first meeting of former Alabama teammates between Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. We all know Tua replaced Jalen at halftime of the 2018 College Football Championship game and led Alabama to that overtime victory over Georgia. Meanwhile, it was Jalen replacing Tua when he was hurt in an SEC title. And what I found interesting was in all of the build-up to this game, one of the journalists reached out to Nick Saban, and he said, I never had 2 players that were really, really good players at the same position who actually supported each other the way these 2 guys supported each other when they were here. So it speaks to their strength of character more than anything else. We know that the Dolphins are on a historic pace offensively, but so are Philadelphia. Both sides on pace to become the 5th and 6th teams since 1970 to average 240-plus passing yards per game and 150 yards per game on the ground. The last time we saw this feat accomplished was back in 2013 for Philadelphia. You look at some of the injuries on Wednesday. DNPs for Reed Blankenship, Lane Johnson, Bradley Roby, and Devontae Smith. Meanwhile, for the Dolphins, Xavier Howard was sidelined Wednesday with a groin injury. Connor Williams out, and we're still trying to make sense of the Dolphins along the offensive line. When we look at this particular matchup, Payne, there are so many different directions that you can go, whether it's the Dolphins' ground game, being able to find that continued success against the team that's stout against the run in Philadelphia. Is Philadelphia's scheme offensively built to attack the Finns where they're most vulnerable defensively? The world is your oyster for a game of this magnitude. Take it where you will.
Yeah, I think we address both sides of the ball here because it is the matchup of the day, at least on paper, and that's why it's Sunday Night Football. 2-5-1 teams in opposing conferences that potentially could face each other in a Super Bowl. We'll see, but I think this is a fun one, especially when the Dolphins are on offense and. For as much as we think Tyreek and Waddle and this high-flying Dolphins aerial attack because they hang 70 on the Browns, Mike McDaniel is very much a run game guy. He wants that ground game to get fired up. Now, he's not stupid. He throws the ball, right? Miami's pass rate is 1.8% over expectation. It's a top 10 rate. But Miami leads the league in both EPA per rush and rushing success rate. And I think that's part of the Dolphins offense that might have a tougher time stepping up in class this week. If you look at Miami, they've faced the second easiest schedule of defenses. And Miami's also faced the 3 worst run defenses in the NFL to date: Denver, Carolina, and the Giants. Now you get the number 2 Eagles run defense. Fletcher Cox returned against the Jets. Marlon Tuipulotu practiced in full on Wednesday. It was a good sign that both Jalen Carter and Milton Williams recorded limiteds earlier in the week. Let's see how those two progress. The Dolphin center, Connor Williams, still isn't practicing. Today's a big day to see if there's some level of progression there for Miami center. So the first part to slowing down the Dolphins offense is not allowing them to be two-dimensional. I don't know if you can completely shut them down, but slowing them down, you got to figure out how to halt that ground game a little bit. The second is getting pressure on Tua. The splits are massive. And I think in a game like this where the Eagles are also stepping up in class, going against the toughest pass offense they've faced this season with a little bit of a ding secondary, pressure becomes even more important. The Eagles right now 6th in pass rush win rate, 4th in pressure rate. Tua, 32nd out of 35 qualifying quarterbacks under pressure, 5th highest turnover-worthy play rate under duress. If the Eagles front doesn't get home, though, then it's a little bit of trouble. Right? Tua is averaging a league best 10.3 yards per pass attempt from a clean pocket, 85% adjusted accuracy. I kind of get the vibe the Eagles will be able to do a decent enough job to at least make Tua and Miami's offense work a little bit here, Todd.
Well, look, I mean, to your point, Miami has been so multiple that you can't take away everything they do, but if you can at least make them operate in fits and spurts like the Buffalo Bills did, there is a path to success in some capacity. Now, if Philadelphia is going to have success, it's not just because their defense is playing well, but the offense has to kind of get out of neutral and not put forth a second half like we saw last week against the Jets where they couldn't do anything, completely shut out. When we look at the Eagles overall, counting stats are interesting. 2nd in yards per game, 9th in passing yards, 2nd in rushing yards, 5th in points per game, and 1st and 3rd down conversions. The advanced stats support a lot of that. 8th in EPA, 5th in success rate. You take away garbage time, suddenly they're 6th in EPA. But Payne, the one thing for Philadelphia that we've seen is a lot of criticism about Brian Johnson, his play calling abilities, and what this adjustment has been from him taking the baton from Shane Steichen, who's now the head coach in Indianapolis. When you've watched Philadelphia offensively, they should be a path to success to run the football against Miami, given what we've seen. But do they use the passing game to set up the run? Or is this where you just continue to feed the horse and make DeAndre Swift carry it 20 to 25 times and force the Dolphins to commit an extra body into the box?
Yeah, I think your overarching point there is very astute, right? It hasn't looked the same. It looks like, Shane Steichen is missed. It's not as fluid. You're having a little bit more of some offensive hiccups. The red zone stuff hasn't been perfect. Now, part of that is an uptick a little bit in the schedule, right? Last year it was a cotton soft schedule. But you are having some issues with Brian Johnson kind of taking on that play calling role. It's difficult. I mean, it is not
I'm not
easy.
trying to sit here and say I could do it, and people that think it's the same way as running a Madden game plan are absolutely nuts. I just get on coaches for their inability to handle the clock, not to go out there and call games.
Right. I mean, it's tough. Like, you're calling plays to set something up, later in the game, but Brian Johnson hasn't found that flow yet, that perfect rhythm. But you still look, right, and the Eagles still have a top 8 offense. So it's not like this is an abject disaster, and they're clearly dropping down in class against, a bottom 8 Miami defense. The matchup does seem favorable as well. I mean, the Dolphins are playing to keep everything in front. So I think Jalen Hurts is probably able to find an early rhythm on passes. I mentioned this to you ahead of last week in regards to Adam Thielen. The Dolphins have allowed over 90% of short passes to be completed. So I think there's certainly an ability there to get Jalen Hurts in rhythm early. Find Goddard. Hit A.J. Brown on some in slants, right? Things of that nature. And I think you can build some confidence there. The other part of the equation here is Miami plays with light boxes at a top 5 rate because Fangio is trying to protect his corners. And Xavier Howard is battling a groin injury that forced him to leave the game early against Carolina and missed the first practice this week. We know Jalen Ramsey is not there. We got to monitor the Xavier Howard situation. But if he's out, or if he's extremely limited and is a shell of himself kind of hobbling around out there with the groin issue, what do you do? Because you can't play a light box against the Eagles. Philly's offensive line, number 1 in run block win rate. The ground game remains extremely efficient, 2nd overall. DeAndre Swift, to your point, has been a massive upgrade over Miles Sanders like we projected he would be.
Stud.
Swift is averaging over 2.6 yards per rush before first contact, and we know Jalen Hurts' ability to run the ball and be physical already creates that extra man advantage in the ground game. So if a defense is playing with a light box, not ideal, right? That's probably going to be good night Irene there for being able to stop the run. Things also, I think, are, we got to monitor it a little bit. Devontae Smith, hamstring, didn't practice on Wednesday. Lane Johnson, ankle injury, didn't practice on Wednesday. Those two would obviously be key for this. Lane Johnson's a tough guy. The word is it's a low ankle sprain. We'll see if he battles his way out there. But I think there's real paths here for the Eagles to have success. And again, they are dropping down in class here, obviously having faced the Jets last week on the road. Tough travel spot, coming from the West Coast the prior week. Now you're settled in back at home, and you have a defense that allows you to kind of do the things that you're best at doing.
You buried the lead about the secret weapon that the Eagles could potentially deploy on their offense this week.
He said he's not washed. He took that question.
He sure did. He said he was willing to go out there and contribute. The over-under on snaps before he ends up hurt again, I'm setting at 17.5. You care to make a friendly wager one way or another?
Be nice to Julio Jones, man. That's one of the best.
No, trust me, at his peak, he was outstanding, and we'll see as a third wide receiver, obviously, he can contribute in this offense. One thing, though, that I found interesting is Mike McDaniel going into a very defensive stance when he was questioned by a reporter. I believe it was Joe Schad asking a little bit about Tua and some of his capabilities. So this is a fun...
You thought that was defensive? I thought it was an emphatic
No, that's
answer
what I'm
to
saying.
A stupid
I don't want to
question.
say, okay, defensive probably not the right word choice, but I also don't think it came from a malicious place for Joe Schad, just saying that, hey, look, Tua's our guy. He's out there executing the offense at a very high level. And it just speaks to the way Mike McDaniel has gone about business. He's identified the talent, what his players can do, and encourage anybody that didn't or doesn't watch some of those mic'd up segments that the Dolphins do after a lot of their Sundays. Absolute must-see TV, about 3 or 4 minutes on YouTube, and you just get a glimpse into the ridiculous personality that is Mike McDaniel and how different he is in the way he thinks about things compared to that old-school football guy.
Mike McDaniel, better than me, didn't actually drop the F-bomb. No, I respect Joe Schad. Actually,
he does a good job.
Good dude. Yeah, I just, is Tua the MVP of this league? No. Does the offense do a ton of creative things that assists its quarterback with motion rates and new motions that everyone ends up stealing after a couple weeks? And yes, like, Mike McDaniel is that offensive mind. We told you he was. The high praise from Kyle Shanahan was something that we just hadn't heard before. I mean, this guy, he's got a ton of talent, and that's what he wanted to tell Joe Schad. Like, the guys that they have with Tyreek and Waddle. And Tua is, if you keep him clean, the accuracy is uncanny. He gets in some trouble when you get some pressure on him, and he will throw the turnover to that, the interception or two that kind of leaves you scratching your head because he throws with such anticipation. And that anticipation allows for you to have a ton of yak with some of these receivers. Now, so you take the good with the bad, because there is going to be one where like, what the hell was he doing there? Oh, he threw like within 1.7 seconds when his receiver hadn't even like left its break yet. So, that's why you see some of that great yak that is so accustomed to, having been seen with the 49ers offense. So this is certainly a game where, if the Dolphins can run the ball and if Tua has time, it's going to operate a little bit more differently. But if the Eagles defense can do a good job at least creating a stalemate in the ground game, and you can get to Tua a couple times, he might throw you one or two. We've kind of seen when they've stepped up in class, right? When they played the Patriots and the Patriots weren't absolutely decimated with defensive injuries. When they went to Buffalo and you saw Tua pressured a little bit and the ground game wasn't completely humming, the offense looks just a little bit different. I don't think you're going to completely shut out Miami. They're just too talented, too well coached. But you can, if you can slow them down a little bit. And I think part of that, too, is keeping them on the sidelines. Because if Miami, again, is going to play with some of those light boxes on defense and the Eagles are going to be able to run the ball, you're going to watch a complete grinder, right? I mean, again, 4 possessions in the first half last week. And if you can play that style of game, it certainly stylistically meshes with Philadelphia just a little bit.
I mean,
more.
look, if I'm Sean Desai and I'm trying to devise a defensive game plan, all I'm doing is watching the New England Patriots and the way they've defended Tyreek Hill, trying to minimize his effectiveness and the big play potential, let Jalen Waddle eat underneath, and hope my defensive line can control the trenches to keep Raheem Mostert largely in check, knowing you don't have to scheme for Devin Achane at the same time. But should be a great game, one for football nerds and football fans, for two teams that have put together outstanding starts to the season at 5-1, and we'll see how the Eagles handle a little bit of adversity in the wake of their first loss. You can follow Payne on X at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. All things Bet the Board. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, best bet time as we look to try and identify some avenues to create plus EV opportunities in our portfolio for the weekend. What have we found for Week 7?
Well, we've created a couple. We just need them to come to fruition. So hopefully the positive variance starts to tick up here. We're going early rather than late, correct?
Yep. Let's go.
Is that what we agreed
let's go
on?
early
Okay.
instead of late.
Okay. Let's go with 4-5-8, the Baltimore Ravens. In terms of how to attack this market, my feeling is if Jahmyr Gibbs gets upgraded, if Brian Branch gets upgraded, you might see this tick a little lower. We obviously know the Lions are extremely beloved right now in the market from recreational bettors. And this is the one sport where recreational bettors truly have a say in the market. So we're looking at Pinnacle, it's Ravens -3, plus 04. You're looking at Ravens -3 even. We'll grade it there, but it might make sense to maybe wait. That's kind of my vibe here. So let's grade it at Ravens -3, even. But my suspicion is this could I don't think we're getting back to 3.5 unless there is just massive confirmation from a specific bettor or two, Todd. I would also shop around. I think, if you're someone who's extremely savvy and has multiple outs, you probably will find a way to get 2.5 -20 or better than -25, which is, it's out there right now at Pinnacle, even if you wanted to go that route. But, we'll grade it here at Ravens -3 even. But I don't know if it's the perfect time to say, hey, go attack this now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a
market entry?
I think there's a chance that we do get a reduced price at 3 even. More so than this number just shoots up to 3.5, especially over the next 24 to 48 hours while, a lot of our listeners are trying to digest some of what's out there. So I think that is a valid point. We think the Ravens can win this game comfortably, but it's all about market entry. And if you have an opportunity to lay 2.5 -20, it's a hell of a lot better than laying 3 flat that's widely available right now.
All right. Let's get out of Dodge.
All right, and that will put a wrap on the Week 7 show. We'll be back with you on Monday for a very intriguing Monday night game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Minnesota Vikings. Wish all of you guys and girls the best of luck with all of your NFL bets this weekend. And with a Baltimore Ravens ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.